Can you guys hear me? The mic's really low. Hi, everyone. 9 years ago, I graduated from this school, and I never attended a Relay for Life event. If someone had told me back then that I'd be speaking at the opening ceremony of one, I wouldn't have believed them and probably would have just obnoxiously laughed at the idea. But when Mrs. McLeod, my former chemistry teacher, reached out just a couple months ago, I knew I had to say yes. Although it's unfortunate that we're all gathered here for this kind of event, it's for a good purpose. So I'm going to briefly share my experience and how cancer has affected me in hopes that I can take something terrible that happened in my life and use it for something good. On May 1st, 2020, my wife Jazmin passed away after battling cancer for 6 years. We were both 22 years old at the time. No, we didn't get married when we were 16. She was officially diagnosed shortly after her 17th birthday. And at that time, we barely even knew each other, thank goodness, because I was still a rather selfish young man with a lot of ignorance and insecurities. But eventually, we fell in love. I've had a lot of people accuse me of some terrible things as the reason behind why I married her, and they all ignore or miss one important fact, that even though Jazmin was sicker than everyone around her, she was more alive than many of them may ever be. If I had the time to explain who she was, I would, but I have to keep this fairly brief, so here's a bit of information to help give you an example. My mom was skeptical at first when she heard I had fallen in love with someone who was terminally ill. I had just gotten out of a relationship that lasted 1.5 years with my first girlfriend. Both of us stayed in it for longer than we should have. We just weren't the right fit for each other, and the relationship became rather toxic. So you can imagine what my mother was thinking. Who is this girl? Is she a good person? Would she make Eythan happy? How could Eythan be this stupid? So she asked my brother about Jazmin, who met her and got to know her a little bit over the weekend that she and I fell in love. My brother responded with, "Mom, have you ever met someone who has an angel inside them? That's Jazmin." After Jazmin made her first visit to Sault Ste. Marie and spent the weekend with me and my family, she was driving out of my parents' driveway as my mother turned to me and said, "Eythan, if you mess this one up, we're disowning you." Everyone immediately fell in love with her. She was intentional, clever, caring, had a good sense of humor, could hold a conversation with anybody. She was honest and just generally a joy to be around, all while having cancer throughout her left kidney and in her lungs. You see, Jazmin dealt with a lot of pain. So far, anyone I've ever talked to that has experienced kidney pain says it's the worst pain. And for Jazmin, the cancer wasn't just a diagnosis, it was very painful. It was originally a tumor the size of a grapefruit just above her left kidney, consuming her adrenal gland. It affected her well-being very intensely, but she didn't let that affect how she treated the people around her. I haven't sat down and officially counted all the visits we made to the emergency room. I'm not sure anyone can remember all of them, but I can remember one time in particular when a man in his 50s was sitting across the room from us, waiting to get a scan, and he was complaining about how difficult his life had been the last few months dealing with testicular cancer. Jazmin could have brought up the surgery that she underwent when she was 16 years old, the treatments she did in Mexico, the trips back and forth to Arizona. She could have brought up that she was terminally ill with stage 4 adrenocortical carcinoma and that she was constantly in and out of the hospital for pain, for scans, for updates about how her cancer had grown. She could have mentioned how many friends she made in hospitals that she had to say goodbye to because they passed away from cancer while she was there, but she didn't. She just sat there, nodding her head, listening to him, making him feel heard. He eventually asked us why such a young couple was there, and Jazmin said she was there to get a scan as well for her cancer. He paused for a bit and stared at us rather blankly, and then asked, "What stage?" And she just said, "Terminal." And he suddenly stopped complaining. He was at a complete loss of words while he was sitting across from what he thought was, and assumed was, a healthy young person. Jazmin did feel kind of bad afterwards. She didn't want to interrupt what he was doing, but he asked, and she answered honestly without getting into detail, and she did this on a few different occasions with different people. Throughout our marriage of almost 3 years, she suffered. Very slowly, she lost weight. She went from 135 pounds to 60 pounds. She went from playing hockey to not being able to hold a glass of water. From swimming across a river so we could enjoy some time at a beach to being anchored to an oxygen machine. She lost most of her muscle function, something we take for granted every day. And she would still do everything she could to make her friends and family feel loved, even if all she could do was just listen to them. She was an amazing person, and of all the people on earth, deserved that suffering the least. I personally don't see a bright side to her death and suffering. There just isn't one. What happened was terrible, and that's it. But her death and suffering don't dictate how I live my life or how her family lives their lives. We ultimately get to choose how we continue on. Cancer didn't dictate how Jazmin lived her life while she was here. She chose to be caring and selfless and intentional. She took what she had and she didn't waste it. The circumstances of your life don't dictate how you live the important parts of it. The things Jazmin took with her after she died weren't tied to any amount of money she had or things she had. They are all tied to who she was and what she meant to the people in her life. And don't get confused. It wasn't the cancer that made her this way. You don't have to go through something terrible. You don't have to suffer or struggle through something to be remembered as a great or known as a great person. You can stop thinking about yourself. You can stop making excuses to get out of doing something for your parents, your grandparents, or siblings, or friends if you have any of those. Life is happening right now, and our lives are insignificant or wasted if we spend it all on ourselves. After Jazmin passed away, I made a number of videos about her, mostly on TikTok if you scroll really far down. And there are a few YouTube videos if you wanted to learn more about that. I apologize for the lack of quality. I didn't know anything about cameras then, but I do now have a full-time job as a videographer. That's just one way that my life has completely changed throughout this process. You might actually recognize me from a Costco video I made on April 1st, especially if you're a teacher. You might remember that one. And my mom wrote an award-winning book about Jazmin's experience from my mom's perspective. It's called Suitcases from Heaven. I'm not telling you about these things to make money. I haven't made anything personally at all. It's an inspiring story that needs to be heard. And I think it's just really important. It could help a lot of people. It was Jazmin's dream to travel the world and speak about her circumstances, but she's not here to do that. So thank you for having me here and listening to a small piece of the story that she wanted to tell, and for going out of your way on a day like this and spending your time to be here supporting this cause. Thank you.